Sarah, when you first saw that trailer listing for $500, what went through your mind?
Honestly, Tony, I remember staring at my phone at 2 in the morning, my belly pressed against the kitchen counter, and thinking this had to be some kind of scam. I mean, who sells a trailer for the price of a decent used refrigerator? But I was 7 months pregnant, had maybe $800 to my name, and my landlord had already started showing my apartment to new tenants. I kept scrolling through those blurry photos of rotting wood and broken windows, telling myself beggars can't be choosers. What I didn't know was that someone had been watching me struggle for weeks, waiting for me to get desperate enough to bite.
But what you found inside that trailer, that's what really changed everything, wasn't it?
Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you.
Sarah, I want to take our listeners back to the beginning of your story. You mentioned that finding that trailer listing felt almost too good to be true. Can you paint a picture of where you were in your life at that moment?
Long pause, Tony. I was 7 months pregnant and living out of my car. I'd been scrolling through rental listings for weeks, watching everything decent disappear within hours of being posted. The shelters had waiting lists longer than my pregnancy timeline, and I was running out of options fast.
That must have been terrifying. What was going through your mind during those late nights in your car?
The fear was constant. I'd park under streetlights in different neighborhoods, trying to find places that felt safe enough to sleep. I remember pressing my hands against my belly and whispering apologies to my baby. Here I was, supposed to be preparing a nursery, reading parenting books, and instead I was rationing gas station snacks and using restaurant bathrooms to brush my teeth.
When you first saw that trailer listing, what caught your attention?
It was the price. $500 to own, not rent. I stared at that number on my phone screen until my eyes watered. Tony, I'd been looking at apartments that wanted first month, last month, and security deposits that totaled more than my entire savings. This trailer was listed as needing work, but it was ownership. It was hope.
Tell me about making that first call to the seller.
His voice was strange, Tony gravelly, like he'd been smoking for decades. But there was something else. The way he paused before answering my questions. When I asked about the condition of the trailer, he said something that stuck with me. He said it had good bones, just needed someone who wasn't afraid of other people's histories.
That's an interesting way to phrase it. Did that concern you at the time?
I thought he meant previous tenants had left it messy. I was desperate enough that I would have bought a place with rotting floors and broken windows. I told him I wasn't afraid of hard work, that I just needed a roof over my head before the baby came. There was this long silence, and then he said something that gave me chills.
What did he say?
He said I sounded perfect for the place. Not that the place would work for me, but that I would be perfect for it. Like the trailer was choosing me instead of the other way around.
Did you ask him what he meant by that?
I tried, but he just gave me an address and told me to meet him there the next day. Said to bring cash and not to bring anyone else. He emphasized that part, Tony, not to bring anyone else. At the time, I thought maybe he was worried about having too many people judge the condition of the place.
Looking back now, how do you interpret that request?
Pause. I think he wanted me isolated, vulnerable, a pregnant woman with no backup, no witnesses, no one who might ask the right questions or notice the wrong details.
Describe that first meeting with him, Sarah. What do you remember?
He was waiting in the driveway when I pulled up. Tall, maybe in his 60s, wearing clothes that looked expensive but old, like he'd bought quality things years ago and just kept wearing them. His hair was silver, perfectly combed, and his shoes were polished despite standing in a yard full of weeds and trash.
That's quite a detailed memory. What struck you as significant about his appearance?
The contrast, Tony. Here was this man who clearly took care with his appearance, selling a property that looked completely abandoned. The trailer was barely visible behind stacks of garbage bags, old furniture, and what looked like decades of accumulated junk. But he stood there like he was showing me a mansion.
What was your first impression of the property itself?
Overwhelming. The smell hit me first, that mixture of mildew, rotting wood, and something else I couldn't identify. Sweet and cloying, like flowers left too long in a vase. The trailer was a faded yellow color, or maybe it had been white once and turned yellow from age and neglect. Windows were boarded up with plywood that had started to warp and split.
Did the seller explain the condition of the place?
He walked me around the perimeter, stepping over garbage and pointing out features like we were touring a show home. He talked about the mature trees that provided privacy, the large lot that gave me space to expand, the solid foundation that would last for generations. I kept looking at the same things he was describing, but I was seeing broken branches, isolation, and concrete blocks that were cracked and sinking into the earth.
What was the interior like during that first visit?
We couldn't get inside, Tony. He said the door was swollen shut from moisture and that he'd have it fixed before the closing. He handed me a flashlight and told me to look through the gaps in the boarded windows, said I could see enough to know it was structurally sound.
And what did you see through those gaps?
Darkness, mostly. The flashlight beam caught glimpses of overturned furniture, more garbage bags, and walls that might have been paneled in dark wood. There was a hallway that disappeared into complete blackness, and I remember thinking the trailer seemed much longer from the inside than it looked from outside.
Did that discrepancy concern you?
Everything concerned me, Tony, but my baby was due in 2 months and winter was coming. I'd spent the night before parked behind a 24-hour diner, and I woke up to frost on my windshield and a security guard tapping on my window. Concern was a luxury I couldn't afford anymore.
So you decided to move forward with the purchase?
I asked him about utilities, about the septic system, about whether the roof leaked. He answered every question with confidence, pulling out papers that showed recent inspections and utility connections. Everything looked legitimate, Tony. More legitimate than anything else I'd been able to afford.
Did you have any sense of being watched during that visit?
Long pause. Now that you ask, yes. I felt eyes on me the entire time, but I assumed it was neighbors curious about the activity. The trailer sat on a street where houses were spaced far apart, hidden behind overgrown hedges and tall fences. I could see glimpses of other homes, but no people.
Tell me about finalizing the sale.
He insisted we handle everything right there, standing in that overgrown driveway. He had a title already prepared, transfer papers that looked official, and even a hand-drawn map showing property boundaries. I counted out $500 in $20 bills while he filled in my name with a fountain pen that looked like it cost more than my car.
Did he ask you much about yourself during this process?
That's what was strange, Tony. He didn't ask anything. Most people, when they see a very pregnant woman buying a rundown trailer by herself, they ask questions. They show concern or curiosity or judgment. He acted like this was the most normal transaction in the world.
But you said he seemed to know things about you.
Not then, but later. After I'd started living there and going through the previous owner's belongings, I found things that suggested he'd known more about my situation than I'd told him. Little things that didn't make sense unless he'd been watching me before we ever spoke.
What kind of things?
A notebook with my license plate number written in it, dated 3 weeks before I called about the trailer. Gas station receipts from places where I'd stopped during my apartment hunting trips. Photographs taken from a distance of me sitting in my car, reading newspaper classifieds.
How did you react when you found those items?
I convinced myself there had to be an innocent explanation. Maybe the previous tenant had a similar car, or the photographs were of someone who looked like me. I was already living there, Tony. I'd used the last of my money for that trailer, and I was 8 months pregnant by then. What choice did I have but to stay?
Before we found those disturbing items, though, tell me about those first few days after you moved in. What was it like to finally have your own place?
Relief, Tony. Pure relief. Even with the smell and the clutter and the strange creaking sounds the trailer made when the wind picked up, it was mine. I spent the first night just lying on an air mattress in what I thought was the living room, listening to my baby move around inside me and feeling grateful.
What were your immediate priorities for making the space livable?
I started with clearing pathways so I could move safely without tripping. Everything was piled so high I had to turn sideways to squeeze through some areas. I found cleaning supplies under the kitchen sink that looked barely used, as if someone had bought them specifically for cleaning up but never got around to it.
Did anything you found during that initial cleaning strike you as unusual?
The personal items were what got to me first. Clothes still hanging in closets, prescription bottles with recent dates, food in the refrigerator that hadn't even expired yet. It felt like someone had just stepped out for groceries and planned to come right back.
Did you try to contact the previous owner to return any personal items?
I asked the seller about it when he stopped by to check on my progress. He said the previous owner had passed away suddenly and left no family. Said anything remaining should just be disposed of, that holding on to dead people's belongings wasn't healthy.
He stopped by to check on your progress? How often did that happen?
More often than I expected, Tony. Always in the evening, always without calling first. He'd knock on the door and ask how the cleaning was going, whether I needed anything, if I felt safe living there alone. The questions always felt like he was fishing for specific information.
What kind of specific information?
Whether I'd contacted anyone about what I was finding, whether I planned to renovate certain areas of the trailer, whether I'd noticed anything unusual about the neighbors. Like he was monitoring what I was discovering and how I was reacting to it.
Sarah, as you're telling me this, I'm getting the sense that even early on, something felt off about this entire situation.
You're right, Tony. But I kept pushing those feelings down because I needed that trailer to work out. I needed to believe I'd found a solution instead of walking into something much more complicated and dangerous than being homeless.
Sarah, before we dive deeper into what you found in that trailer, I'd love to hear more about how you ended up there in the first place. Walk me through those final weeks of your search.
Size, Tony, it was like watching sand slip through an hourglass. Every day my belly got bigger, and every day the rental market got more impossible. I remember sitting in my car outside the 4th apartment that week, listening to a landlord tell me over the phone that they'd decided to go with someone else. I was 7 months along, and I could feel the baby moving around like she knew we were running out of time.
That must have been terrifying. How were you holding up emotionally during all of this?
I kept thinking about my grandmother, actually. She used to tell me stories about the Depression, how families would make do with whatever they could find. She'd say, "Sarah, sometimes the Lord closes doors just to show you the window was open all along." I held on to that, even when I was crying in grocery store parking lots because I couldn't find anything under $1,000 a month.
And that's when you found the listing for the trailer?
It was the strangest thing, Tony. I'd been checking Craigslist religiously, refresh after refresh, and suddenly there it was. Posted just 20 minutes earlier. Mobile home, as is, $500 firm, cash only. No photos, barely any description. Just an address out on Maple Ridge Road and a phone number.
What was your first impression when you drove out there?
Pause. The whole area felt frozen in time. You know how some neighborhoods have that feeling, like they're holding secrets? Maple Ridge Road winds through these old oak trees that form a canopy overhead. Even in broad daylight, it's dim under there. The mobile homes are spread out, some maintained beautifully with flower gardens and painted porches, others slowly surrendering to the elements.
And the trailer itself?
It sat at the end of a gravel driveway, maybe a quarter-mile back from the road. White aluminum siding that had gone gray with age and neglect. The previous owner had let everything grow wild around it. Honeysuckle vines were climbing up the sides, and there were these old rose bushes that had gone completely feral, just masses of thorns with the occasional pink bloom peeking through.
Tell me about meeting the seller.
That's where things started feeling unusual, though I was too desperate to pay attention to my instincts. The man who showed up, he introduced himself as handling the estate. Said the previous owner had been an elderly woman who passed without family. But Tony, he knew things about me that I hadn't mentioned on the phone. He asked if I was feeling all right in my condition. Said he hoped I'd found a good doctor out here.
Had you told him you were new to the area?
That's just it, I hadn't. I'd only given my first name and said I was interested in seeing the property. But he talked like he knew I'd been looking for weeks, like he was aware of my situation. At the time, I told myself maybe I'd mentioned it and forgotten. Pregnancy brain, you know. Your mind gets scattered when you're worried about everything.
What was his demeanor like?
Helpful, almost grandfatherly. He had these pale blue eyes and hands that shook just slightly, the way older men's do sometimes. He kept saying he was glad someone young was interested, that the place needed life breathed back into it. He even offered to have some of the larger trash items hauled away before I moved in, but I told him I'd handle it myself.
Why did you want to handle it yourself?
Laugh softly, pride mostly. And honestly, Tony, I was afraid if I seemed too needy, he might change his mind about the price. $500 was a miracle, and I wasn't about to look that gift horse in the mouth. I figured hauling trash was something I could manage gradually, even pregnant.
Describe what the inside looked like that first day.
It was like walking into someone's interrupted life. The woman who'd lived there, she wasn't a hoarder exactly, but she was definitely a keeper of things. Newspapers stacked chest-high along the walls, all organized by date going back decades. Kitchen counters covered with mason jars full of buttons, rubber bands, twist ties, the kind of saving that comes from living through hard times.
Could you tell anything about her personality from what she'd left behind?
She read voraciously. There were books everywhere, with careful notes written in the margins in this beautiful, faded handwriting. Poetry, mystery novels, biographies of forgotten politicians, and photographs, Tony. Boxes and boxes of photographs. but not the kind you'd expect. Not family pictures, but random snapshots of the neighborhood. People walking their dogs, children playing in yards, cars parked in driveways.
That sounds unusual.
At the time, I thought maybe she was just lonely, you know? Maybe taking pictures was her way of feeling connected to the community. But there were so many, and they went back so far. Some of those Polaroids had dates on the back from the 70s and 80s. Different families, different cars, but always the same secretive angle, like they were taken from a distance.
Did any of your new neighbors reach out when you moved in?
The woman directly across the road, she came by the second day I was there, brought me a casserole and introduced herself as Helen. She'd lived on Maple Ridge for 40 years, raised 3 kids there. Helen told me she was relieved someone was finally cleaning up that old place, said it had been an eyesore for months since the previous owner passed.
What did Helen tell you about the previous owner?
That's where things got interesting, Tony. Helen described her as a reclusive woman named Dorothy who kept to herself but seemed harmless enough. But when I mentioned the man who'd sold me the trailer, Helen got this confused look on her face. She said Dorothy's place was supposed to go through the county after she died, since there weren't any relatives. She'd never heard of any estate sale.
How did that make you feel?
Pause, like the ground was shifting under my feet. Here I was, finally feeling like maybe things were going to work out, and suddenly I'm wondering if I've been part of some kind of mistake or scam. But I had a bill of sale signed and everything. And honestly, Tony, I was too exhausted and too far along in my pregnancy to start unraveling it all.
So you decided to stay and focus on making it home.
Exactly. I threw myself into cleaning and organizing, trying to make the space livable before the baby came. I told myself that whatever confusion there might be about the sale, I was there legitimately, and I was making something positive out of a neglected situation. The baby was due in 6 weeks, and I needed to nest, you know? I needed to believe we'd found our place.
And that's when you started discovering things that Dorothy had hidden away.
Voice drops slightly. That's when I realized Dorothy might have been keeping more than old newspapers and photographs, Tony. That's when I started to understand why someone might have been watching me long before I ever knew that trailer existed.
Sarah, I want to take our listeners back to those first few days in the trailer. You just made this purchase, $500 for what most people would call a disaster. But you were committed to making it work.
I had to be committed, Tony. When you're 7 months pregnant and that's literally your last $500, commitment isn't really a choice anymore, it's survival.
Walk me through what those early mornings were like. The sun coming up over your new property, seeing it all in daylight.
Long pause. You know, there's something almost sacred about dawn when you're that desperate. I'd wake up on my air mattress, that's all the furniture I had, and I'd hear these sounds I'd never heard before, not city sounds. The trailer was surrounded by these massive oak trees, must have been there for decades, and they'd creak in the morning breeze like old bones stretching.
And the smell?
Oh, the smell. It hit you in waves, Tony. Decades of cigarette smoke baked into every surface, something musty and organic underneath, like wet leaves that never dried. And then this sharp chemical smell I couldn't identify. Cleaning products maybe, or something else entirely.
You mentioned neighbors. In a rural area like that, neighbors can make or break your experience.
The closest house was maybe a quarter mile through the trees. I could see a light in their kitchen window some mornings, but I hadn't met them yet. There was this older woman who lived there. I'd catch glimpses of her sometimes, hanging laundry or working in her garden. She had this way of moving, very deliberate, like she was always watching something.
Did she ever approach you?
Not at first. But I had this feeling, you know, like when you're reading alone at night, and suddenly you're certain someone's watching you through the window. I'd be sorting through trash inside the trailer, and I'd get this prickle on the back of my neck. I'd look up, scan the tree line, but never saw anything definite.
Tell me about the previous owner. What did you learn about him in those early days?
The realtor, and I use that term loosely for the guy who sold it to me out of his pickup truck, he said the owner had been some kind of recluse. Lived there for maybe 20 years, kept to himself, paid his lot fees in cash, never caused trouble. Then one day, just gone.
Gone how?
That was the thing, Tony. Nobody seemed to know exactly. The story kept changing depending on who I talked to. The guy at the hardware store said he'd moved to Florida to be near family. The woman at the post office thought maybe he'd died and nobody found him for weeks. But when I pressed for details, everyone got vague real quick.
And you were there alone, pregnant, trying to make sense of all this.
Every night, I'd sit on that broken front step with a cup of tea. watching the sun set through those oak branches. The baby would start kicking around that time. She was always more active in the evenings. I'd put my hand on my belly and try to imagine what kind of life we could build there.
What did you see in your mind?
Silly dreams, mostly. I pictured hanging wind chimes from the tree branches, maybe planting a little vegetable garden where all that overgrown brush was. I thought about teaching her to climb those big oaks when she got older, showing her how to identify bird calls. There was this one bird, sounded like it was saying teacher, 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 and I decided that would be the first one I'd teach her.
But something was nagging at you.
The trash told stories, Tony. When you're going through someone's belongings bag by bag, you start to piece together their life. This man, there were prescription bottles with his name, utility bills going back years. But the strange thing was how abruptly everything stopped.
What do you mean?
Like I'd find mail and newspapers dated right up until about 6 months before I bought the place. Then nothing. But here's the odd part. There were fresh things mixed in. New batteries still in packaging. A loaf of bread that couldn't have been there more than a few weeks, judging by the mold.
Did you think someone had been coming back?
I didn't know what to think. Maybe family members cleaning things out gradually, but why leave fresh food? And there were these little details that bothered me. Like, I found 3 different coffee cups in the sink, but all the mail was addressed to just one person.
Your neighbors, did any of them mention seeing activity at the trailer?
I finally worked up the courage to walk over to that house through the trees. Introduced myself to the woman I'd been seeing. Turns out her name was Margaret, and she'd lived there longer than anyone. Sweet lady offered me fresh tomatoes from her garden.
What did Margaret tell you?
She said the strangest thing, Tony. She looked at me with these sharp blue eyes and said, "I'm glad someone young is finally living there again. That place has been holding its breath too long." When I asked her about the previous owner, she just shook her head and said some people leave, but their stories stay behind.
That must have sent a chill through you.
It did. But at the time, I chalked it up to small-town mystery-making. You know how rural communities can be. Everyone's got theories about everyone else. I was focused on practical things. Getting the electricity working properly, figuring out the plumbing, making the place safe for a baby.
But those stories Margaret mentioned, they were about to become very real for you.
Pause. If I'd known then what I was really walking into, Tony, I'm not sure I would have stayed, but maybe that's the mercy of ignorance. Sometimes you have to be deep in the woods before you realize how dark they really are.
So you've settled into the trailer. You're starting to feel like maybe this crazy $500 gamble might actually work out. What happened next, Sarah?
Well, I'd been there about a week and I was finally getting to the deeper cleaning. You know how it is when you're pregnant. You get these bursts of energy and you just have to use them when they come.
The nesting instinct kicking in?
Exactly. I was determined to make that place spotless before the baby came. I'd already tackled the obvious stuff, the piles of newspapers, the broken furniture, all that surface clutter, but there were still areas I hadn't really examined closely.
What drew your attention first?
The kitchen cabinets. Most of them were falling apart, but there was this one cabinet under the sink that seemed oddly solid compared to the rest. The door was warped, painted over so many times it barely opened, but when I finally got it loose. Pause.
What did you find? So, you investigated further?
I ran my hands along the back wall, and I felt this slight gap along one edge. Like the back panel wasn't quite flush. When I pressed on it, it shifted just a little bit.
A false back?
That's what I thought. I found a butter knife and worked it along the edges until I could pry the panel loose. Behind it was this narrow space, maybe 6 inches deep, running the full width of the cabinet.
And there was something inside?
A metal box. One of those fireproof document boxes you can buy at any office store. It was wedged in there tight, like someone had measured the space exactly.
What went through your mind when you saw it?
Honestly, my first thought was that maybe I'd found some cash or jewelry, something the previous owner had hidden away and forgotten about. I figured it might be my lucky day.
But it wasn't that simple, was it?
Long pause. No, it wasn't simple at all. The box wasn't locked, just latched shut. When I opened it, the first thing I saw was photographs. Old ones, the kind with the white borders that were popular maybe 20 or 30 years ago.
What were the photographs of?
A young woman, maybe early 20s, with long dark hair. She was pretty, but there was something about the photos that felt wrong immediately.
Wrong how?
They were taken from a distance. Through windows, across parking lots, from behind trees. None of them looked like she knew she was being photographed. And they were organized chronologically. I could tell because her hair got longer in some, shorter in others, like someone had been documenting her over a long period of time.
How many photographs were there?
Dozens, maybe 50 or 60. All of the same woman, all taken without her knowledge. But that wasn't the worst part.
What else was in the box?
A manila folder underneath the photos. Inside were newspaper clippings, all from the same time period as the photographs. Missing person reports, search updates, family pleas for information.
The woman from the photographs?
Jennifer Lynn Morrison, 23 years old when she disappeared from a shopping mall parking lot in 1994. The articles said she'd just graduated from college, was planning to get married that fall.
And you're sitting there, pregnant and alone, realizing you've stumbled onto evidence from a missing person case?
I felt like the floor had dropped out from under me. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold the clippings. Here I was, thinking I'd finally found a safe place for me and my baby, and instead I'd found this.
What else was in the folder?
A notebook. Handwritten entries, like a journal, but not a normal one. It was more like surveillance notes. Times and locations where this Jennifer had been seen. Her routines, her habits, places she went regularly.
How detailed were these notes?
Frighteningly detailed. What time she left for work, what she ordered at her favorite coffee shop, which friends she spent time with. Someone had been watching her for months before she disappeared.
Did you recognize the handwriting?
That's what really made my blood run cold, Tony. I'd seen that handwriting before, on the sales agreement for the trailer. It was the same person who'd sold me the property.
The previous owner had been stalking Jennifer Morrison?
That's what it looked like. And according to the newspaper clippings, her case had never been solved. She was still listed as missing, not dead. But given what I was looking at, pause.
You realized you might be holding evidence of something much worse than a missing person case.
Exactly. And then I found the last item in the box, at the very bottom.
What was it?
A driver's license. Jennifer's driver's license with her photo and address. But it had been altered. Someone had scratched out her information and written something else over it.
What did they write?
Practice makes perfect. And then, underneath that, in the same handwriting, number 1 of many.
Long pause. Number 1 of many.
I dropped that license like it was on fire. I was sitting on the floor of this trailer, 7 months pregnant, holding what could be evidence of multiple murders, and the person who'd hidden it all was the same person who'd sold me this place.
What was your first instinct, Sarah?
To run. Just pack up my car and drive away and never look back. But where was I going to go? I'd spent almost everything I had on this place. I had nowhere else to turn, and a baby coming in 2 months.
So, you were trapped.
That's exactly how it felt. Trapped in a place that might belong to a killer, holding evidence that could either bring justice for Jennifer Morrison or make me the next target.
So you'd been living in the trailer for what? About 3 weeks at that point?
3 weeks and 2 days to be exact. I was keeping track because every day that passed meant I was one step closer to having a real home before the baby came. I thought I was finally getting my life together, Tony.
Tell me about that morning. What happened that changed everything?
I was cleaning out what I thought would become the nursery. It was this tiny back room, barely bigger than a closet, but I had such plans for it. I'd found some paint samples at the hardware store, soft yellows and greens, since I didn't know if I was having a boy or girl.
And that's when you made the discovery?
I was trying to move this old dresser that the previous owner had left behind. Heavy thing, probably from the 70s. When I finally got it shifted, I noticed something odd about the wall behind it.
What did you see?
The paneling didn't line up quite right. There was this tiny gap, maybe half an inch, running vertical along what should have been a solid seam. At first I thought maybe it was just poor craftsmanship, you know? The whole trailer was pretty rough around the edges.
But something made you look closer.
My curiosity got the better of me. I pressed against that section of wall and it gave a little. Not much, but enough to tell me it wasn't attached the same way as the rest of the panels.
Were you nervous? Excited?
Honestly, I was hoping maybe I'd found some extra storage space. When you're living in under 300 square feet and expecting a baby, every inch matters. I thought maybe it was a little hidden closet or something practical like that.
How did you get it open?
I found this old putty knife in the kitchen junk drawer and worked it into that gap. It took some doing, but eventually the whole section popped loose. It was like a hidden panel, hinged on one side.
And what was behind it?
Long pause, a metal box. Not huge, maybe the size of a shoebox, but heavy. It was wedged back in there tight, like someone had been very deliberate about hiding it.
What went through your mind when you saw it?
Part of me wanted to just push the panel back and pretend I'd never seen anything. There was something about the way it was hidden, Sarah, something that felt wrong. But I was also thinking, what if there's money in there? What if the old owner left something valuable behind?
You were still thinking practically at that point.
I had $47 to my name and a baby due in 4 months. Practical was all I could afford to think, Tony, so I pulled that box out and carried it to the kitchen table.
Was it locked?
No lock, but the lid was stuck tight. Took me a few minutes to work it open, when I finally got it. Pause. When I saw what was inside, I knew my life was about to get very complicated.
What was in the box, Sarah?
Photographs. Dozens of them. And they weren't family snapshots or anything innocent like that. These were surveillance photos, Tony. Pictures of a young woman, maybe early 20s, taken from a distance. At a grocery store, getting in her car, walking into what looked like an apartment building.
How did you know they were surveillance photos?
The angles. The way they were taken. Whoever shot these was hiding, using a long lens. And they were organized, Tony. Dated on the back, arranged in chronological order. This wasn't some coincidence or misunderstanding.
What else was in the box?
Newspaper clippings. All about the same woman. Her name was Jennifer Morrison, and according to these articles, she'd gone missing about 15 years ago. Just vanished one day, never found.
How did that make you feel, holding those photographs?
Sick. Terrified. I kept thinking about this young woman, probably not much older than I was, being watched and followed. And then I started thinking about who had been living in this trailer before me.
The person who hid this box.
Exactly. Someone had been watching Jennifer Morrison, documenting her daily routine, and then she disappeared. And I was sitting in what might have been that person's home, Sarah. I was living where they lived.
What did you do next?
I sat there staring at those photos for I don't know how long. My hands were shaking, the baby was kicking like crazy, and I kept thinking I should call the police. But then I started wondering if whoever did this was still around, still watching.
Sarah, when you first discovered those photographs hidden in the trailer, how did that change your perspective on what you thought was just a simple housing situation?
Long pause. Tony, I keep thinking about how naive I was. Here I was, 7 months pregnant, desperate for any roof over my head, and I thought finding this trailer for $500 was like winning the lottery. But those pictures, they weren't just random photographs someone forgot to pack.
What made you realize they were something more significant?
The way they were hidden, for one thing. Not just tucked away in a drawer, but actually concealed behind a false panel I only found because the wood was warped from moisture damage. And the woman in the photos, she looked so young, maybe early 20s. There were dozens of them, Tony. Some looked like they were taken without her knowing.
That must have been terrifying to discover, especially in your condition. How did you process that realization?
Pause. I sat on that musty couch for hours, just staring at them. My baby was kicking up a storm, like she could sense my anxiety. Part of me wanted to convince myself they were innocent, maybe family photos or pictures from an old boyfriend. But there was something about the angles, the distance they were shot from. It felt invasive.
Did you recognize the woman in any of the photographs?
Not at first. But I started paying more attention to missing person flyers around town after that. You know how you see those faces on bulletin boards at the grocery store or the post office, but you don't really look at them? I began studying every one, and then I found her.
How did that discovery affect your daily routine, your sense of safety?
Everything changed, Tony. I started locking the trailer door even during the day. I'd peek through the curtains before going outside. The pregnancy was already making me feel vulnerable, but this added a whole different layer of fear. I kept wondering, who took these pictures? And more importantly, where were they now?
Were you able to identify when the photographs might have been taken?
Some of them had dates on the back. The earliest ones were from 1987. The most recent was 1989. But Tony, here's what really got to me. The woman in the photos, her name was Linda Morrison, and she disappeared in October of 1989. I found the newspaper article at the library.
That's a connection that would shake anyone. How did you handle having that kind of evidence in your possession?
Pause. I wish I could say I immediately called the police, but I kept thinking about my situation. I'm a single woman, pregnant, no family support, living in what's basically a metal box that most people wouldn't use to store garden tools. What if they thought I was involved somehow? What if this became a legal mess that left me homeless?
Those are understandable concerns. Were there other factors influencing your hesitation?
The previous owner, the one I bought the trailer from, Mr. Henderson, he seemed to know an awful lot about my circumstances when I called about the listing. He asked specific questions about whether I was planning to live there alone, whether I had family in the area. At the time, I thought he was just being a concerned seller.
But looking back, those questions took on a different meaning?
Exactly. And Tony, here's something that still gives me chills. When I was going through more of the hidden compartments, because once you find one, you start looking everywhere. I found a notebook, pages and pages of what looked like surveillance notes. Different women's names, their routines, where they worked, what time they came home.
How many names were in this notebook?
12 different women, spanning nearly 15 years. Linda Morrison was just one of them. Some entries stopped abruptly after a few weeks of notes. Others went on for months. The handwriting was meticulous, obsessive.
Did you recognize any of the other names from missing person cases?
I couldn't check all of them without raising suspicions at the library, but I found 2 others. Margaret Chen disappeared in 1993. Jessica Torres vanished in 1998. Both young women, both from our county.
Sarah, at what point did you realize that your discovery might put you in personal danger?
Long pause when I found my own name written in the margin of the notebook's last page. Just Sarah in that same careful handwriting. But Tony, I'd never met Mr. Henderson before that day I bought the trailer. At least I didn't think I had.
Sarah, when you first made the decision to buy that trailer, you were in such a desperate place. But finding those hidden compartments must have changed everything about how you saw your situation.
Pause. It really did, Tony. One moment I'm thinking my biggest problem is getting the electricity working before the baby comes, and the next I'm holding photographs that could solve a decades-old disappearance. It's strange how quickly your perspective can shift.
How did you handle that shift? I imagine it must have been overwhelming, especially being pregnant and dealing with everything alone.
You know, at first I almost convinced myself I was imagining things. The stress, the hormones, the isolation. I kept thinking maybe I was seeing connections that weren't really there. But then I'd look at those photos again, read through those notes, and I knew it was real.
Tell me about those first few days after the discovery. How did it affect your daily routine?
Everything changed. I'd wake up and instead of focusing on unpacking or fixing the plumbing, I'd find myself staring at that hidden compartment. I started jumping at every sound outside. A car door slamming, footsteps on gravel, even the wind rattling the windows differently. I realized I didn't know my neighbors at all, and suddenly that felt terrifying.
That sense of vulnerability must have been particularly intense given your condition.
Long pause. That's exactly it. Before finding those things, being pregnant felt like the most important thing about me. Every decision revolved around preparing for this baby. But suddenly, I'm thinking about missing persons and potential killers, and I felt this horrible guilt that I was putting my unborn child in danger.
Guilt is such a complex emotion in situations like this. What else were you feeling guilty about?
I kept wondering if I should have done more research before buying the place. $500 seemed too good to be true, and maybe I ignored red flags because I was desperate. I felt guilty for not being more careful, more protective. What kind of mother was I going to be if I couldn't even provide a safe home?
But Sarah, you were working with limited options and limited resources. How did you start to process those feelings?
I remember sitting in that trailer one evening, feeling the baby move for the first time in days. I realized I'd been so consumed with worry that I hadn't been taking care of myself. I wasn't eating regularly, wasn't sleeping well. The stress was affecting everything, and that's when I knew I had to make some decisions.
What kind of decisions were you considering?
Well, the obvious choice was to contact the police immediately, turn everything over and let them handle it. But I kept thinking about what Dorothy at the general store had said about Harold being a private person who'd lived there for 40 years. What if he wasn't involved in anything sinister? What if turning in that evidence destroyed his reputation unfairly?
So you were grappling with the moral complexity of the situation.
Exactly. And then there was the practical side. If I involved the police, would I lose my home? Would this place become a crime scene? Would I end up back in my car, homeless and pregnant, while investigators tore apart the only shelter I could afford?
Those are incredibly difficult calculations to make when you're already vulnerable.
The isolation made it worse. I had no one to talk it through with. My family had already written me off when I got pregnant. Friends had drifted away. I was making these enormous decisions completely alone, and I kept second-guessing myself.
How did that isolation affect your thinking about the evidence you'd found?
Pause. It made everything feel more intense, more personal. I started having these conversations in my head with Harold, wondering what he would want me to do. I know that sounds strange, but when you're alone that much, your imagination starts filling in the silence.
Not strange at all. You were trying to make sense of a situation that would challenge anyone. Did you find yourself developing theories about what had happened?
I did. I'd lie awake at night creating different scenarios. Maybe Harold had been investigating the disappearance himself. Maybe he was protecting someone. Maybe he was documenting evidence against someone dangerous. But then darker possibilities would creep in too.
And all of this was happening while you were preparing for motherhood.
That's what made it so surreal. I'd spend the morning researching missing person cases on my phone and the afternoon reading pregnancy books and setting up the tiny nursery area. It felt like I was living two completely different lives simultaneously.
Sarah, looking back now, how do you think that period of uncertainty shaped you as a person?
It taught me that sometimes there are no good choices, only necessary ones, and that being alone doesn't mean being powerless, even when it feels that way.
Sarah, you mentioned finding more evidence in that hidden compartment. I can only imagine how that must have felt, being alone in that trailer with your baby on the way. What was going through your mind?
Long pause. You know, Tony, I keep thinking about that moment when I pulled out the second box. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely open it. There were more photographs, but these were different, personal ones.
Personal how?
Family photos, birthday parties, Christmas mornings, a little girl blowing out candles on a cake. And then I realized who I was looking at. The missing girl, but younger, much younger. These weren't evidence photos, Tony. These were someone's memories.
Someone had been collecting her life story.
That's what terrified me. But as I kept looking, I found something else. A journal. Not hers. Someone else's handwriting, documenting her daily routines. What time she left for school, which route she took, what she wore on different days.
Like a hunter studying prey.
Softly, exactly. And Tony, some of those entries were dated just days before she disappeared. But here's what really chilled me. The last entry wasn't about her at all.
What do you mean?
It was about the investigation. About how the police were getting too close. About needing to disappear, for a while, let things cool down. The person who wrote this journal, they knew they were being watched.
Did you recognize the handwriting? Had you seen it before?
Not then, but I would later. Pause. I sat there on that filthy floor, surrounded by this evidence, and I started thinking about my own child. About legacy, you know. What we leave behind for the people we love.
And what we leave behind for strangers who stumble into our lives.
Yes, I kept thinking about this missing girl's parents. Somewhere out there, they've spent decades not knowing what happened to their daughter. Not knowing if she suffered, if she's still alive somewhere, if they should keep hoping or start grieving.
That's a terrible burden to carry.
But it's also a terrible burden to inherit, Tony, because now I knew. Or at least I knew more than they did. And what was I supposed to do with that knowledge?
What did your instincts tell you?
Laughs bitterly, my instincts told me to run. Pack up what little I had and find somewhere else to live. But my bank account told me something different. I had nowhere else to go.
So you stayed.
I stayed. But I started paying attention in ways I never had before. Really looking at my neighbors, listening to conversations at the local store. This wasn't some random crime that happened in my trailer, Tony. This was someone local. Someone who knew the area well enough to hide evidence there.
Someone who might still be around.
That's what kept me awake at night. I'd lie there feeling my baby move, thinking about how this child was going to grow up in a place where someone had gotten away with murder. Maybe for decades.
Did you consider going to the police at that point?
Every single day. But I also started researching the original case. I found old newspaper articles at the library, talked to some of the older residents who remembered when it happened.
What did you learn?
I learned that the investigation had focused on transients, drifters, passing through town. The theory was that someone just happened to be in the wrong place at the wrong time, took this girl, and moved on.
But the evidence suggested otherwise.
Completely otherwise. This was planned, methodical, local. And Tony, I started to understand that whoever did this had been very careful about misdirecting the investigation.
How so?
Some of the evidence I found, it was almost too convenient. Like breadcrumbs leading away from town instead of deeper into it. I'm not a detective, but even I could see that someone had worked very hard to make this look like an outside job.
That takes a certain kind of intelligence.
And a certain kind of desperation. Pause. I remember one night, I was about 7 months along by then, I had this moment of clarity. I realized I wasn't just carrying my own child anymore. I was carrying this secret, this responsibility to a family I'd never met.
That's a profound shift in perspective.
It changed everything about how I saw myself, Tony. I'd always been someone who minded my own business, who didn't want to get involved in other people's problems. But this wasn't other people's problems anymore. This was my problem.
Because it was literally in your home.
Because it was literally under my feet. Every morning I'd wake up and step over that spot where I'd found the compartment. I'd make breakfast in a kitchen where someone had hidden evidence of murder. I'd plan for my baby's future in a place haunted by someone else's stolen future.
Did you feel guilty about that? About building your life on top of someone else's tragedy?
Long pause, yes and no. I felt guilty about the secret. But I also felt angry that I'd been put in this position. I didn't ask for any of this. I just wanted a safe place to have my baby.
And yet you couldn't unknow what you knew.
Exactly. And Tony, as my pregnancy progressed, I started having these dreams. Not nightmares exactly, but these vivid dreams about this girl, about what her life might have been like if she'd had the chance to grow up, get married, have children of her own.
You were imagining the life that was taken from her.
And from her parents. I kept thinking about how they never got to be grandparents, never got to see their daughter graduate, or fall in love, or have her own family. All of that was stolen, not just from her, but from everyone who loved her.
That's a heavy realization to carry while preparing for your own child's arrival.
It made everything more precious, but also more fragile. I became hyper-aware of how quickly things can change, how easily someone can just vanish from your life.
Did that awareness change how you were preparing for motherhood?
Softly, it made me more determined to be brave. I realized that if I wanted to raise a child who would stand up for what's right, I needed to figure out how to do that myself.
Even when standing up meant putting yourself at risk.
Even then. Because what kind of world was I bringing my baby into if people like me just stayed silent when we knew something was wrong?
So, you made a decision. Sarah, you mentioned finding those photographs hidden in the trailer. When you're holding evidence like that in your hands, what goes through your mind?
Long pause. You know, Tony, I kept staring at this one picture of a young woman, maybe 25, with this bright smile. She was standing next to what looked like the same trailer, but years ago when it was actually maintained. The grass was cut, there were flower boxes. It felt like looking at a ghost.
Did you recognize her? Had you seen her face anywhere before?
That's what haunted me. There was something familiar about her, but I couldn't place it. Then I remembered the missing person posters I'd seen around town when I first moved here. Faded ones, taped to telephone poles. Most people probably don't notice them anymore, but when you're looking for affordable housing, you walk a lot of neighborhoods. You see things.
So this wasn't just some random discovery. This connected to your community, to people who might still be wondering what happened to someone they loved.
Exactly. And that's when the weight of it really hit me. I wasn't just pregnant and struggling to find a place to live anymore. I was sitting in what might have been someone's final location, holding pictures that could give a family answers they'd been waiting decades for.
How did that change your perspective on the trailer itself, on your decision to buy it?
Pause. I started questioning everything. Was the price so low because someone knew what had happened there? Was I being watched when I responded to that listing? I mean, what are the odds that a desperate pregnant woman would stumble onto evidence like this?
Those are troubling questions. Did you feel like you were in immediate danger?
Not immediately, but there was this growing sense that I'd stepped into something much bigger than myself. I kept thinking about my baby, about the life I was trying to build. Here I was, trying to create a safe space for us, and I'm discovering that this place might have been someone else's nightmare.
When you're in a situation like that, with limited resources and options, how do you weigh doing the right thing against protecting yourself?
That's the question that kept me awake at night. I'd sit there with my hand on my belly, feeling the baby move, and I'd think about that young woman in the photographs, someone's daughter, maybe someone's sister. They deserved justice, didn't they?
But justice comes with risks, especially when you don't know who might still be out there.
Right. And I had to consider that if I came forward, I might become a target. But if I stayed silent, I'd be living in this space knowing that I could have helped solve something important and chose not to. Either choice felt like it would change who I was as a person.
Did you find yourself thinking about what kind of mother you wanted to be? How this decision might reflect on the values you'd pass on?
Voice softening every single day. I'd imagine my child growing up and asking me about this someday. Could I look them in the eye and say I chose the safe path when someone else's family was still suffering? But then I'd think, what good would I be as a mother if I put us both in danger for strangers?
Those are impossible choices. There's no clear right answer when you're balancing moral obligation against survival.
I started having these conversations with the baby, just talking out loud about what we should do. Sounds silly, but somehow it helped me think through the options. This little person was depending on me to make good decisions.
What did those conversations tell you about yourself?
That I'd spent most of my life reacting to circumstances instead of really choosing who I wanted to be. Being pregnant, being alone, finding this evidence. It all forced me to think about legacy in a way I never had before. Not just what I'd leave behind someday, but what I was building right now.
Legacy is a powerful motivator. Did that influence how you viewed the photographs and documents?
It made me realize that keeping secrets might feel safer in the moment, but it's not the kind of life I wanted to model. At the same time, I couldn't ignore that I had very real immediate needs: food, safety, medical care. Noble intentions don't pay bills or protect you from people who might want to keep the past buried.
So you were caught between the person you wanted to be and the reality of your circumstances.
Exactly. And somewhere in that space between idealism and survival, I had to figure out who I actually was.
Sarah, you mentioned finding those documents, but I sense there's something more you haven't told me yet. What happened when you actually looked through everything carefully?
Long pause. Well, Tony, that's when everything I thought I knew got turned upside down. I was sitting there on the trailer floor, going through each paper methodically, and I found something that made my blood run cold.
What was it?
A birth certificate. For someone named Margaret Ellen Winters, born in 1962. At first I thought, okay, maybe this was Harold's wife or sister, but then I saw the parents' names listed.
And?
Harold Winters was listed as the father. Tony, Harold wasn't some random old man who disappeared. He was Margaret's father. The missing woman everyone had been searching for was his daughter.
My God. So when you found all that evidence about Margaret's disappearance,
I was looking at a father's desperate attempt to solve his own daughter's murder. Every newspaper clipping, every police report he'd somehow gotten copies of, every handwritten note. It wasn't the collection of a perpetrator, Tony. It was the obsession of a grieving parent who couldn't let go.
that must have completely changed how you viewed everything you'd found. How did that realization hit you?
Like a freight train. I started reading his handwritten notes with new eyes. They weren't sinister, they were heartbreaking. Pages and pages of him trying to piece together Margaret's last known whereabouts, names of people she'd been seen with, theories about what might have happened to her.
Did he seem to have any leads, any suspects?
That's what really got to me, Tony. He had focused on one person in particular, someone named Danny Kovac, who had been dating Margaret before she disappeared. Harold had documented a pattern of controlling behavior, instances where neighbors heard arguing from Margaret's apartment.
Had the police investigated this Danny person?
According to Harold's notes, they'd questioned him but never arrested him. Apparently, Danny had an alibi for the night Margaret was reported missing. But Harold didn't buy it. He'd written things like Danny's brother owns the garage, could have covered for him, and why won't police check phone records again?
It sounds like Harold was conducting his own parallel investigation.
Exactly. And Tony, some of these notes were dated just weeks before Harold himself disappeared. The last entry I found was chilling. It said, "Danny knows I'm getting close. Saw him drive past the house again today. If something happens to me, look in the back panel behind the water heater."
Did you check there?
I was afraid to. By this point, I'm 8 months pregnant, alone in this trailer that belonged to a man who may have been killed for getting too close to the truth about his daughter's murder. But I had to know.
What did you find?
Photographs, Tony. Pictures of Danny Kovac's truck parked at various locations around town on the night Margaret disappeared. Timestamps showed Harold had been following him, documenting everywhere Danny went. The alibi was falling apart.
Harold had evidence that could have broken the case open.
And based on that last note, Danny figured out what Harold was doing. I started wondering if Harold's disappearance wasn't random at all. Maybe he was getting ready to take this new evidence to the police, and Danny couldn't let that happen.
So you're sitting there, pregnant and vulnerable, with evidence that someone may have committed 2 murders to keep hidden.
Right. And here's the part that really scared me, Tony. Remember how I told you the trailer listing seemed too good to be true? How it appeared right when I desperately needed it?
You mentioned that, yes.
I started thinking about the timing. Harold disappears 3 years ago, but this trailer only came on the market 6 months ago, right when I was obviously pregnant and searching for cheap housing. What if Danny had been keeping tabs on the property all this time?
You think he was watching to see who might rent it?
What if he was hoping someone would find Harold's evidence and he could deal with them before they went to the authorities? Someone vulnerable, like a desperate pregnant woman with no family support system.
Sarah, that's a terrifying thought. Did you feel like you were being watched?
Looking back with this new perspective, yes. There had been moments when I felt eyes on me, times when I thought I saw the same vehicle drive by too often. I'd dismissed it as pregnancy, paranoia, but now.
Now you realized you might have walked directly into a trap that was set specifically for whoever discovered Harold's investigation.
Exactly, Tony. And I had to decide what to do with that knowledge.
Sarah, you mentioned finding those photographs in the hidden compartment. When you looked at them more closely, what did you see?
At first, I thought they were just pictures of the neighborhood. Different houses, different angles. But then I noticed something that made my blood run cold.
What was it?
There were pictures of me, Tony. Pictures of me looking at apartments, walking through neighborhoods I'd visited months before I ever heard about that trailer.
Pause. He'd been following you.
For weeks, maybe longer. There was one photo of me standing outside a rental office downtown, another of me at the grocery store. I remembered that day because I'd felt so discouraged about my housing search.
How did that realization change your understanding of what was happening?
Everything I thought I knew flipped upside down. This wasn't some random woman who stumbled onto evidence of an old crime. Harold had chosen me specifically.
The $500 price suddenly made more sense.
Exactly. No one sells property that cheap unless they want a particular buyer. He'd been watching me struggle, watching me get desperate. He knew I'd have no choice but to say yes.
What do you think he wanted from you, Sarah?
I think Harold was dying. The medications I found, the medical equipment hidden in that back room. I think he needed someone to find what he'd kept hidden all those years.
Someone vulnerable enough to need the trailer, but resourceful enough to discover the truth.
A pregnant woman with nowhere else to go fits that description perfectly. I couldn't just pack up and leave like someone else might.
Did you find anything that confirmed your suspicions about his condition?
Hospital discharge papers dated just 2 weeks before I bought the trailer. Stage 4 lung cancer. The doctors had given him less than a month.
So he was racing against time.
Harold knew he was dying with this secret. Maybe guilt finally got to him, or maybe he was afraid of what would happen to Margaret's family if the truth died with him.
How did it feel to realize you'd been manipulated into this situation?
Terrifying at first. But then I understood that regardless of his methods, Harold had given me a chance to do something right, something that mattered more than my own fear.
Sarah, you mentioned earlier that you'd made a decision about the evidence. Walk me through that moment when you realized what you had to do.
Long pause. It wasn't one moment, Tony. It was sitting in that trailer at 3 a.m, feeling my baby kick and knowing I couldn't bring a child into a world where I stayed silent about murder.
That must have been terrifying, knowing what confronting this truth might mean for your safety.
Terrifying doesn't cover it. But you know what scared me more? The thought of my child growing up in a neighborhood where someone like Harold walked free, where other families might suffer what the Hendersons went through.
So you decided to take the evidence to the police, but you didn't go immediately, did you?
No. I spent 2 days planning. I made copies of everything, hid them in 3 different locations. I wrote letters explaining what I'd found, sealed them, gave one to my sister in another state.
You were preparing for the possibility that something might happen to you.
I was preparing to be a mother, Tony. Mothers protect their children, even before they're born. If Harold came after me, I wanted to make sure the truth would still come out.
Tell me about that final night before you went to the authorities.
I sat in that trailer, surrounded by boxes of evidence I'd organized like some kind of prosecutor, and I talked to my baby. Voice softening, I told them about justice, about doing what's right even when it's dangerous.
What gave you the courage to follow through?
Margaret Henderson's wedding ring. I found it in the last hidden compartment, wrapped in tissue paper like Harold was saving some kind of trophy. I held it, thinking about her family, about all the years they'd wondered and hoped and grieved without answers.
That ring became a symbol for you.
It became a responsibility. I realized Harold had been watching me because he knew I was vulnerable, pregnant, alone, desperate. He thought I'd be too scared to act, but he underestimated what a mother will do to protect her child's future.
So, you made the call.
I made the call. But first, I did one more thing. I called Detective Morrison and asked him to meet me somewhere public, somewhere Harold couldn't corner me alone.
You weren't taking any chances.
Tony, by then I understood I wasn't just fighting for justice. I was fighting for my life.
So there you were, Sarah, with all this evidence spread out before you. What was going through your mind as you prepared for what might come next?
I kept thinking about my baby, Tony. Every decision I'd made up to that point had been about survival, about finding us a safe place. But now I realized safety wasn't just about having a roof over our heads.
How do you mean?
Well, I could stay quiet, keep living in that trailer, and hope Harold never figured out what I'd found. But that meant letting him walk free, knowing what he'd done to that poor woman. And what if there were others?
That must have been an impossible choice to wrestle with.
It was. I sat there for hours that night just staring at those photographs, that journal. I kept reading her words over and over. She'd been so scared, Tony. She knew something was wrong, but she had nowhere to go, no one who believed her.
Did you see yourself in her situation?
Pause, more than I wanted to admit. Here I was, pregnant, alone, desperately trying to make this work. If something happened to me, who would even notice? Who would look for me?
But you found the strength to act anyway.
I found something else in that journal that changed everything. On the last page she'd written, she'd scratched out a message. It said, "If someone finds this, please don't let him do this to anyone else." She was thinking about the next person, even when she was terrified for her own life.
That must have been powerful to read.
It was like she was speaking directly to me across all those years. I realized I wasn't just making this choice for myself anymore. I was making it for her, for my baby, for any other woman who might end up in Harold's crosshairs.
So, you made your decision.
I did. But I also knew I couldn't just march over there and confront him. I needed a plan, needed to be smart about it. I spent the rest of that night figuring out exactly how I was going to handle this.
What did that planning look like?
First, I made copies of everything. Hid them in different places. Then I started thinking about who I could trust, who would believe me, and most importantly, how to protect myself and my baby when I finally made my move.
Sarah, you're standing in that trailer, holding evidence that could solve a decades-old case. What's going through your mind in that moment?
Everything just crystallized, Tony. I'm 8 months pregnant, barely scraping by, and I realize I'm holding someone's life in my hands. Not just the victim's story, but potentially my own future.
Walk me through that decision. You could have simply called the police.
Long pause. I almost did. I had my phone out, ready to dial. But then I thought about what Detective Morrison had said earlier about how cases like this work. The investigation, the media attention, becoming a witness.
You were worried about becoming a target yourself.
Partly, yes. But it was more than that. I kept thinking about this baby Touch's stomach, and what kind of world I was bringing her into. Do you stay silent when you know the truth? Or do you speak up even when it's dangerous?
What tipped the scales for you?
I found a letter in the evidence box, written by the victim to her sister, never sent. She talked about being afraid, about someone watching her. Reading her words, Tony, it was like she was speaking directly to me across all those years.
Because you'd felt watched too.
Exactly. And I realized that staying silent wouldn't protect me. It would just mean her voice stayed buried forever. My daughter deserves to grow up, knowing her mother chose courage over comfort.
So, you made the call.
I called Detective Morrison, told him I had something he needed to see. When he arrived and saw what I'd found, his whole demeanor changed. 30 years he'd wondered what happened to Linda Chen.
Linda Chen, that was her name.
A 24-year-old teacher who vanished without a trace. The evidence showed she'd discovered something about her neighbor, the man who'd owned my trailer. She'd been documenting his activities for weeks.
And the previous owner? The one who'd been watching you?
Was her neighbor's son. He'd been keeping tabs on that evidence for decades, probably wondering if it would surface. When I moved in, started cleaning, asking questions around the neighborhood.
He got nervous.
Terrified, more like. But sometimes doing the right thing means accepting that fear and moving forward anyway. That's what I wanted to teach my daughter even before she was born.
Sarah, you're standing in that trailer with decades of evidence in your hands. What's going through your mind in that moment?
Everything just crystallized, Tony. This wasn't about me anymore. It was about Emma, about justice, about doing what's right even when you're terrified.
You made a choice that put you and your unborn child at tremendous risk.
I called Detective Morris right then. Told him everything. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold the phone.
What did you say to him?
I said, I found Emma Patterson. I know what happened to her. Pause. There was this long silence, and then he asked if I was safe.
Were you?
Frank was still out there. But I realized something important. Staying silent wasn't keeping me safe. It was just letting evil continue.
That's a profound shift in thinking.
Sometimes the most dangerous thing you can do is nothing at all, Tony. Sometimes courage means picking up the phone.
So here we are, Sarah, 6 months later. You're settled in your new place with little Emma. When you look back at everything that happened, what stays with you most?
The quiet, Tony. For so long, I lived with this weight of not knowing, of being afraid. Now when Emma sleeps and the house is still, it's peaceful quiet, not fearful silence.
Detective Morris told me the case is officially closed. Harold Brennan confessed to killing his wife in 1987, hiding her body, then watching the trailer for decades to make sure his secret stayed buried.
Soft laugh. He probably never imagined a desperate pregnant woman would be thorough enough to find those hidden compartments.
Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you just ignored what you found?
Every day. But I keep coming back to this. Rose Brennan had been waiting 37 years for someone to speak for her. I couldn't stay silent.
And now?
Now Emma and I are building our own story. A better one.
So here we are, Sarah, 6 months later. When you look back at that $500 trailer purchase, what do you see now?
Pause. I see a woman who thought she was buying shelter, but actually bought her own strength. That trailer was never really about the money, was it?
What do you mean by that?
Harold knew I'd find those compartments. He'd been watching me, learning who I was. He chose me because he believed I'd do what others couldn't.
And your daughter? How has this changed how you think about the future?
Soft laugh. Emma sleeps in the room where I found that first photograph. Sometimes I watch her and think about cycles, how secrets can poison a place, but truth can heal it.
The neighborhood seems different now, too.
People talk to each other again. Miss Chen brings soup. The Hendersons wave. It's like Harold's secret was a weight pressing down on everyone, even those who didn't know it existed.
Any regrets?
None. We're exactly where we belong.